Hello, this is cjhoyle. Today is Saturday, June the 11th, 2022, and welcome to the 8th and final day of my Grand River solo canoeing adventure. So the time is currently 5:55 a.m. and I spent the evening last night camped here at the Sulphur Spring Campground within Byng Island Conservation Area. I had a nice peaceful evening last night. There were a couple of raindrops that fell at around 4 a.m., but they didn't amount to anything, and there's no more rain in the forecast for the rest of the morning. So it's only 6:45, but I've already got the campsite all packed up and the canoe fully loaded, so I'm ready to hop inside to begin the final day of this adventure. Beginning from this spot on the river across from Dunnville, my grand finale route will take me to Port Maitland, where the Grand River terminates as it empties into Lake Erie. So things are nice and calm and peaceful out here on the river this morning. So I've now just paddled to the end of Byng Island, and there's another dam there between Byng Island and the next island up here. And I've now paddled along here to the very edge of the conservation area lands where there are some houses. And last night when I walked to town, I took an exit that was over there behind those trees. And up ahead there I can see the Rainham Rd bridge that I walked across last night to get to town. And over here on the left I can see another dam, which is built between this island that I just passed on the left and the causeway. So just passing under that bridge, and I can see lots of nice calm water up ahead. And I'm expecting the next part of my paddling should be through some marshland. So I'm just paddling past the Grand River Marina and Cafe. And I'm noticing over there it looks like they have canoe and kayak rentals here. And over there across that marsh is the community of Dunnville, where I had my dinner last night. Based on the orientation of those wind turbines, I think I'll have mostly a crosswind as I paddle today. So these are more of the 2.3 megawatt Siemens turbines that are part of the Grand Renewable Wind project that I have been seeing the last couple of days. Well, I don't have the water entirely to myself this morning. I can see some people over there heading upstream in a fishing boat. So the time is now 7:20 a.m. I've paddled 2 kilometers so far today, and I've reached the part of the river which is far less sheltered from the wind. The water is no longer as smooth as glass like it was when I started today, but there's still something very special about being out on the water this early in the morning. As I'm paddling along, I'm remembering back to the shallow, narrow, rocky spot in the same river where my trip began only 8 days ago. The river has transformed so much in the 211 kilometers that I've paddled, and this wide marshy section is a much better illustration of why they call this the Grand River. Over the years, this river has actually gone by many different names, including Rivière Rapide, the Ooze River, and O.C. Gonhu-Hadaje, which in the Haudenosaunee indigenous language means Willow River. The final day of a long adventure like this is always bittersweet. I know it will feel like a great accomplishment when I reach the Port Maitland lighthouse after many long days spent on the water. But of course it will also be sad pulling the canoe out of the water for the very last time as this thoroughly enjoyable vacation draws to its conclusion. So I've just about reached the end of the marshland now, and up ahead I can see an area where there are a bunch of boats docked. Well, these are certainly bigger boats than I've been seeing thus far on this trip. Keep in mind that we're now paddling on water which is directly connected to Lake Erie, and thus also connected to all the other Great Lakes, so these boats have probably traveled very far in their lifetimes. This boat here looks like some kind of a passenger boat. And along this same shoreline is the Port Maitland Marina, where there are lots more boats docked. The time is now 8 a.m. and I've paddled 4.7 kilometers so far, which means I'm already halfway to my destination. Just paddling past an old abandoned boat here in the marsh, which has some stuff growing in it, so it's clearly been there for a while, but still seems to be floating a little bit at least. There hasn't been a single day on this trip when I haven't seen at least one great blue heron, but most days I've seen dozens of them. So I'm now getting a bit of a closer look at the turbines on the other side of the river, which are 3 megawatt Enercon turbines, part of a project called Niagara Region. So I've now reached the part of the river where it curves around to the right, and at the moment I'm paddling straight into the wind, but it looks like I should get some shelter from it if I follow this left-hand shore. Well, not actually really any shelter from the wind yet, but that's okay. I guess I needed a workout this morning anyway. So it's now 8:35 and I paddled 7.3 kilometers, and these wind turbines on the right are built on top of an old airport which has been converted to a Royal Canadian Air Force Museum. Perched up in that tree there I can see a bald eagle, the third that I've seen on this trip. Standing very still up there. Over there I can see another fairly large boat docked in this relatively industrial part of the Grand River near Port Maitland. So over here on the right, I'm paddling past the Port Maitland Sailing Club, and straight up ahead I can see the finish line for my trip, where the river opens up into the endless waters of Lake Erie. So the time is now 9 a.m. and I paddled 8.8 kilometers so far. But before I head out to the lake that way, I'm actually gonna take a little bit of a detour over here to the left and head my way up this little canal here. So there are a bunch of old boats parked here in this channel, but the real reason why I came this way is still to come up ahead. So this old canal is blocked up ahead by this railway spur which is built across it. So I'm gonna dock the canoe here and walk the rest of the way to the destination that I'm hoping to go and see. So like I was saying, this railway spur here blocks the path of this old historic canal, and that over there straight ahead is what I've been looking forward to go and see. So this here is Lock 27 Port Maitland, which was built back in 1847. Built during a similar era as the Rideau Canal, this lock allowed boats to be raised from the level of Lake Erie up to the same level as the water above the dam in Dunnville, so it allowed ships to be able to travel up the Grand River to destinations such as Brantford or Paris, but it also allowed them to be able to take the feeder canal, which connected the water from above the Dunnville Dam all the way over to the Welland Canal. So as you can see, the gates of the lock are no longer here, and I believe it's been about 150 years since this lock was actually operated. And looking over this way in the distance, you can see the feeder canal. Most of the feeder canal system is still in place, but at this point it's kind of just a big swampy mess where you couldn't take a boat through. I believe that's a beaver out there swimming in the old canal. Well, with that final point of interest now checked off my list, I can now head out that way to the waters of Lake Erie. I'm pretty sure these boats are fishing boats, and they're used to catch the Lake Erie perch like I ate for dinner last night. This building here says Siddle Fisheries, and I think sitting next to the building there with all those jugs is one of the nets that they use for catching fish. So I've come out of that canal now, and as you can see here, I've arrived in the community of Port Maitland, and straight ahead there you can see the Port Maitland Pier with a lighthouse out on the end of it. So this dock over here on my right is my pickup spot for this trip, but before I call it quits, I'm gonna paddle out to the very end of the pier out there so I can actually feel like I'm in the lake as opposed to in the mouth of the river here. Now it's a pretty windy day today, and Lake Erie is a very big lake, so I'm gonna be very careful for this last section of my trip here. I can see that this pier here certainly is a popular spot for people to go fishing today. So things are definitely a bit more choppy out here, but I've just about made it out to the end of the pier where the lighthouse is, and I actually rode my bike out to the end of that pier about 3 years ago. And looking further down the shoreline in the other direction, that land which you can see straight ahead is Rock Point Provincial Park, where I camped at 4 years ago. Well, this water is definitely choppier than anything that I've paddled elsewhere on my trip, but I think by Lake Erie standards, this is actually considered a pretty calm day. But now with the Port Maitland Lighthouse behind me in my rear view mirror, I can confidently say that I've paddled all the way to Lake Erie. Now to let the waves take me back upriver to the spot where I'm going to get picked up. And just like clockwork, as I make my way back to our meeting spot, my dad has arrived at the pier, and he's the one filming me as I take my last few paddle strokes of this trip. Having a family member able to do the drop-off and pickup at my start and end point made the logistics of this trip really straightforward. I'm very grateful of both my dad and mom for all their support of my adventures behind the scenes. So at 9:56, I've reached the dock here, and my total distance today was 11.7 kilometers. When I tally up the distances for each day of the trip, I get 221 kilometers, which means I averaged about 28 kilometers per day. I also kept track of all of my expenses on this trip, and here are the totals. The canoe I used was a rental, and the cost was $240 for 8 days. The most expensive aspect of the trip was the campsites, which cost just under $300. I spent $135 on meals at restaurants and $100 on groceries for all my other meals. Including a few other miscellaneous expenses, the total for the trip was just under $800, which is pretty reasonable for a week-long vacation. I enjoyed paddling the Grand River very much, and this is a trip that I strongly recommend to other paddlers. The daily distances of this route are quite manageable, especially with the flow of the current helping you along. Throughout the course of the 8 days, there are only 6 portages to do, and the longest one is less than 250 meters. The Grand River is rich in history, with many impressive remnants of the past on display as you float by. The scenery is incredible in its natural beauty, and it constantly evolves as you progress further downstream. And even if you're only half as lucky as I was, you'll be sure to have no shortage of intimate animal sightings along the way. For For the benefit of those who are interested in trying this trip for themselves, I've decided to share a link below to the interactive electronic map that I created for planning my trip. This shows you the exact route that I followed down the river and how I broke up my distances across the 8 days. I've included details about each campground I stayed at, including the campsite numbers I selected, which were all very close to the river. I've also identified the locations of all the dams and the routes to the portages that you'll need to take to get past them. But before you embark on a trip like this, it's important that you do your research. A resource I can recommend is the Grand River Conservation Authority's book about paddling the Grand River. I've included a link below where you can buy this book, but you may also be able to find it at your local library, like I did. If you've enjoyed the format that I used for making these videos, you might also enjoy the series that I created last summer chronicling my 10-day canoe trip from Kingston to Ottawa on the historic Rideau Canal, or a similar trip I did the year before on the Trent-Severn Waterway. Thank you very much for joining me in sharing this 8-day adventure on the Grand River. It's truly a privilege going on these solo adventures, but also getting to have all of you come along with me through your video screens. If you followed all the way to the end of this series, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below, and until my next adventure, thanks for watching.